Hi everyone, welcome to another segment on Chapter 3. Last segment we looked at price ceilings, and this segment we're going to look at price floors and also something called a quota. So just as a quick review, when the government regulates the price of a product, it's called the price control. Last segment, price ceiling, that's the government regulation of a maximum price that can be charged for a product. Now we're going to look at price floor, which is the government regulation that stipulates the minimum price that can be charged. And remember, it doesn't mean that that is the price charged. It's the minimum price that can be charged. Certainly the price can be higher. So let's take a look at that. So here we go. The government, when it thinks the price of a particular product is too low for producers, it'll set a price floor. So now the government is protecting producers, not consumers, because not many consumers are going to say, hey, the price is too low, please raise it up. But producers will. And a couple of examples are things like minimum wage. Well, who's the producer of labor? And the answer is you and me. The workers are the producer of labor. So minimum wage is just a price floor put in to protect workers. We'll take a closer look at that. And sometimes in agricultural products, price floors are put on. Agriculture, food, is a necessity in countries, and farmers can't control the weather. So to protect them, the government will put in price floors to make sure that they make a reasonable living. Also, we don't want to be dependent on importing all of our food from other countries, so we can put price floors in place to protect our local Canadian or local country industries. One thing to remember though, we'll look, price floors cause surpluses. So let's move on and take a quick look at the graph. So here's kind of just a generic graph. They'll all look the same when you're trying to show a price floor, but you start off by finding the normal equilibrium where demand and supply cross, the equilibrium quantity is 20, the equilibrium price would be 5, this case price per bushel. The government comes along and says, you know what, we want to throw in a protective measure. We're going to put a price floor. Now they wrote price ceiling here. Correct that on your slide. It's a price floor. Okay, correct that on your slides. So the initial equilibrium was 5 and 20, and the price floor, at a price floor of 7, so that's our price floor, we go across to the demand curve to come down and find that's quantity demanded. That's what people are willing to buy at this higher price of 7. But at this higher price of 7, producers off the supply curve, we go down and find out they're willing to make and sell 25. And so they do. So 25 are produced, 15 are only demanded. And so there's a surplus of 10 that's created. So price floors cause surplus. And if the government has put this in place and it's an agricultural product, whose responsibility do you think it is to buy that excess surplus? And if you're thinking it's the government's, that's true. It's the government's responsibility to buy an excess surplus in agriculture when they put a price floor in. Now let's look at another example. Now here we've got the exact same graph, but now we're doing the very specific example of minimum wages. Now, most people might know that the minimum wage in Alberta is now $15 an hour for minimum wage industries like service industries and things like that. But let's just say the minimum wage is 7. But first we start at equilibrium. If the demanders, in other words, the businesses demanding labor, and the suppliers of labor, in other words, you and me, we're in a free market. This graph is showing there'd be an equilibrium quantity of workers working of 100,000 and an equilibrium wage of 5. Okay, the government comes out and says, you know, that's just too low. And this is exactly what happened, only the numbers, the level of wages is higher. They came out and said, let's make a minimum wage of 7. So at this higher price of 7, what do you think buyers of labor thought? What do you think restaurants and bars thought? And they are reflected in the demand curve. So you take that $7 minimum wage, go to the demand curve, come down, and you see now they only want 90,000 workers. They used to want 100,000, but they only want 90 now because the price of workers went up. So they won't hire as many, they'll cut back hours. And if some of you were working here last year or 2 years ago, you would have seen this happen to you and your friends. But at this higher wage, suppliers of labor, that's you and me, we look at this industry and we go, huh, minimum wage is high, so maybe I'll spend a little bit longer working in this industry. So the quantity supplied of people willing to work at this higher minimum wage grows. So when you look at the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded, 110 minus 90, that results in a surplus of workers. And unfortunately, that's called unemployment. So putting in a minimum wage or a price floor causes unemployment, causes that surplus of unemployment. Now, there is an upside to employers. It's not a very nice upside. Now, all of a sudden, they have way more people knocking at their door for jobs, so they can maybe, get a little pickier, be a little nastier, engage in some discrimination to hire certain people they want to, and that kind of thing. But it gives them um, much more choice, but it's not really a good solution. So back to agriculture. If it's an agriculture product and the government has to buy it because they're the ones that set that price floor, what do they do with the surplus? Well, one thing they can do is store it. If it's grain, they can put it in grain elevators and keep it as long as they can before they sell it, but that costs money. So not only did they have to buy the surplus, now they have to spend more money to store it. They could convert it. So if it's milk or fruit, they convert it into dry milk or dried fruit or powdered milk. But that also costs money. So again, they have to buy the surplus in the first place by their price floor policy. And now they have to convert it, costs even more. One thing that might be tempting is, well, why don't we take our surplus, Canada, and just sell it abroad, take it overseas and just sell it for a really cheap price to get rid of it? Won't they like that? And the answer is emphatically no, because their own industry is trying to survive. And if we go and dump cheap product into another country, then their farmers are going to have to face lower prices and maybe really mess up their agricultural economy. So this is actually very illegal. It's called dumping, and it's a highly illegal practice. Something that might be accepted is they could donate it, possibly. We could donate it to another country, and that's a possibility, but the same problem would happen is it would really mess with their agricultural economy. But if there's been a catastrophe or something like that, certainly they'd be welcoming of our excess product. And the last thing, which happens more often than you know, look it up on the web, you can destroy it. Governments may just burn product or just take it out and spill it over a ship into the ocean. And it's a huge waste. It's politically very unpopular. In fact, you often don't hear about it, but it's a great way to get rid of the surplus without causing any international concern about dumping or paying extra money to store it or convert it. You just simply destroy it, and the problem, unfortunately, goes away. There is one other solution rather than putting in a price floor and the government have to buying all the surplus. The government can enforce a quota, which is an output restriction in a particular industry. And that actually raises price without causing a surplus. So let's take a look at what the equilibrium price would be here. If the normal demanding of the product and supplying of the product were allowed in a free market, then we'd see that the quantity traded, or the equilibrium quantity, would be 6 million kilos, but the equilibrium price would be only 4. So the government may say, you know something, 4 is not good enough. So let's try and get that price a little higher. And what they would do then is they do their math and they look at the market and they come out and they say, you know what? We're going to impose a quota of 4 million kilos. And then they split it up amongst the farmers. That's a hard problem of itself. But for our intents and purposes here, if there's a quota of 4 million, then we just go to the market. That in essence becomes the new supply curve, only it goes straight up and down. And where those two intersect, that's the price that consumers would be willing to pay, this new $6. So in effect, they've raised the price. They've got the farmers to earn more dollars per kilo simply by restricting supply. And what does this do? Well, there's no surplus. The government doesn't have to buy a surplus and get rid of it or destroy it or store it or convert it and even pay more costs. There's no surplus. They've just restricted quota. They have to force that. Then the market off the demand curve, this is really the price line, what they're willing to pay, is $6. And at $6, the market clears. So there's no surplus. So a quota is one way to restrict the output, raising the price for producers without causing a surplus. So in the next section on chapter 3, we're going to take a quick look at 2 slides, and they're another advanced look at supply and demand, and all it is adding a tax or a subsidy to an industry. What does that do? How does that affect output and price? The addition of taxes and a subsidy, and we'll see you when we get there.